Hello and welcome to this episode of Code Boulevard. I'm Matt and here we are going to discuss about Redis deployment types and see how it's going to benefit us. Doesn't matter if you are a software engineer, developer, or a DevOps engineer. In any case, you should know in which scenario, which type of deployment can be helpful for you. Let's start our definition by checking which type of deployment we have. Generally, we have two types of deployments. One is single node and multi-node. Using a single node deployment where we all read and write happens from a single machine. So single node can be helpful because it's easy to set up and maintenance. In the other side, we have multi-node deployment, which means we would have more than one masters or replicas, and based on your scenario, you can choose one of the type that we will discuss about that. And it's gonna bring some benefits to our application based on the type of your scenario. You can choose which one you prefer to use. First, let's check single node pros and cons here. When we talk about single node, it means it's easy to set up and manage because you are going to have one single instance of your Redis on one machine and it's extremely easy to use. It doesn't need any replication process. So it's good for testing purposes. If you have a single application, it's perfectly fits you. But in the other side, we also have some cons like scalability problem when it comes to data size. And it means if the data amount that your application is going to use is huge, is not going to fit in one machine, so that's going to be a problem for you. Now we have scalability or transaction per second problem here because your Redis instance is gonna be hosted on one machine and that machine has limited resources in terms of CPU, so it can support a limited number of transaction per seconds, or we call it TPS. And if your read or write goes beyond that limit, your machine or pipeline can be failed and your application is not gonna be able to use your Redis service here. Now let's talk about multi-node deployment. To overcome this problem that we mentioned here, we need to choose another approach. Here is multi-node deployment. We have two types of deployment when it comes to multi-node. First is replication, second is cluster, and the third one is sentinels. And based on your scenario, you can choose which one do you prefer to implement or set up in your infrastructure. So let's start by showing the structure and setup of each deployment type by drawing a diagram. Let's start with the replication here. In replication, usually we have one master node on the top of the structure. And let me write it down that this is gonna be our master. So we will have several replicas. It can be one to any number of replicas that you need. So based on the number of reads that you have and you want to support in your application, you can increase the number of replication that you have here. And of course, there is a communication between replica and master because data is gonna be replicated in a real time between master and replicas. So mostly we use master for write command. Also, sometimes we can use it for read command, but it's not that common. And in replica, we mostly use them for read. So in case you want to segregate or you want to separate the command and query, you can simply point to master when it comes to command and point to replica when it comes to query. So we can say this one is kind of read-only mode for us, and application cannot change anything here. But in master node, we are able to change, expire some key, delete some key, add some key, and the data will be reflected in replicas kind of immediately. Of course, there is a small delay here, but it's not noticeable that much, so we can just ignore it. Now let's check the properties of this setup and deployment. In replication mode, we usually have one master, several replicas, and we separated our read-write model by just sending our write request to the master, sending our read request to the replicas. Let's say if one replica is able to handle 1000 requests per second for read command. It's gonna be add up here by adding more replicas. So in case I have 3 replicas here, the overall throughput of my application is gonna be about 3000 read requests per second. Now you can see we can scale up our application by adding more replicas here, but still we have the problem with master node and it's not possible to scale up your application. And in case the amount of data that you have in master node is too much, this replication structure or setup is not going to work for you. And the other point about replication is we need to keep all data in master and same copy of the data in each replica. So in case you have 100 gigabyte data here, it's gonna be same copy of data here, same here. So we will need a lot of resources. This is the replication. This is the pros and cons of this setup. It's time to move forward for the next option, which is cluster. The structure of cluster is kind of same, but with a small difference here. We are going to have a master on the top of the structure and some replicas underneath. So for sake of simplicity, I just named them R1, R2, and R3. But in cluster mode, we are going to have more than one master. That's the difference between replication and cluster setup. And those masters, they are going to communicate with each other because our data will be distributed between these nodes. Each master that we have here, let me call this M2 and M3, and they will have the same replica. In cluster mode, we are going to divide our data between masters because we have several master nodes, and when you want to try to add some keys in this Redis service, it's going to be go to one of the services that we have here. But the decision that which master is responsible to handle your request mostly can be done in the application side. There are some client proxy that can do this for us, but mostly it happens in client side. So let's say in the same example that we mentioned about 100 gigabyte of data in cluster mode, let's say 30 gigabyte of data goes to this master, 30 gigabyte goes to this one, and the remaining 40 gigabyte will be persisted in master 3. As you can see, we have distributed our data between different masters, which they can be hosted on different machines. So in this structure, we have scalability in the write mode as well, and same for read mode. But in the replication, we didn't have this feature in master node and write mode. We can have write scalability here in this example by adding more master. And in case the amount of data is going to be bigger, it's easy to handle this scenario because by adding one more master here, you will be able to accept and persist more data. And in case one of the master goes down, we have enough replica, and one of the replicas is going to be promoted to be a master. And from this perspective, we will have availability. So the system is going to be highly available, write scalable, and read scalable. Here you see the cluster is much more better than replication in case of scalability, but of course it's gonna bring a lot of complexity to our application infrastructure because you need to handle the distribution of data between different nodes, and before persisting any data in a Redis service, you need to decide which node of master is possible to persist your data in there. Now it's time to talk about the Sentinel's deployment. Sentinel deployment is when your amount of data is not that much. It means we can handle that amount of data in just single machine as we had in replication mode. So it can be one option to use Sentinels. But let's see how it's going to be look like in diagram. As you would notice here, we have the same setup as replication here, but there's a difference in Sentinel's structure. We are gonna have some Sentinel service here. I would call the Sentinel 1, S2, and S3, which they can be hosted on different machine, and they are constantly monitor the status of master, and in case one of the sentinels reach to this point that master is not reachable, they are gonna communicate with the other sentinel service, and if they reach to the point that master is not reachable, once the majority is reached, one of the sentinel will become a leader to do the failover process. So let's say in this example, sentinel 1 is gonna be responsible to bring a new master into the system. It will promote one of the replicas as a master, and the data will be replicated between new master and the rest of replicas. The difference between Sentinel and cluster, in case you don't have that much data, so one machine is gonna be enough for you, or the complexity of distributing data is too much for you, so you can easily go for Sentinel. Now let's recap what we have learned and when to use what, because we have a different type of multi-node deployment, but we should be aware in which scenario we can use which one of these. So let's say the first one is replication. Whenever read scalability matters for you, I think it's the best option because there's no that much complexity. There's no need to distribute data. And if the amount of data that you want to keep in the master node is not that much, replication can work for you. And it's the best option in those kind of scenarios. The second option is cluster. When data size is not fitting on one machine and you need write scalability plus read scalability, and you also need a high available system, cluster can work for you. At the same time, it's gonna bring some complexity in your infrastructure and your system. So many benefits here, and mostly in a big application, they mostly use cluster because they have both write and read scalability. They have highly available system. And the third one is Sentinels. Whenever high availability is critical, but the amount of data that you have is not that much, means you can put all your keys or your data in one machine. Sentinels is a good option for you. Now, based on what we have discussed till here, you as a developer or a DevOps engineer, you are able to decide which type of deployment fits you, and based on your scenario you would also migrate from one deployment type to the other one. And most of the time we can start with replication. In case you need high availability with the same amount of data, go for Sentinels. But in a very big system, mostly cluster works for you because you need both availability in both sides, write and read. Yes, that's all. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm Matt Gafuri from Code Boulevard. You can find us on different social medias, and thanks for watching.